Noise rock is a genre of music that's so incredibly close to my heart that I don't think I could ever live without it. It's a genre that rewards those with the utmost of creativity, but it also rewards those who use their own limitations, whether it be ability, recording methods, or just their resources to their advantage. And to say I love the work of Steve Albini, well, it's a complete understatement. Steve Albini's contribution to music as a whole has inspired me to pick up a guitar again, explore other forms of music, even if it has no fucking relation to Albini in the slightest. Without me getting into Big Black's songs about fucking in my 9th grade workshop class, I don't think this channel would have ever existed. Steve Nunn in parentheses Albini, yes, that is his legal name, born on July 22nd, 1962 in Pasadena, California, in which he later moved to Missoula, Montana, is that one Italian-American recording guy you've probably have heard a bunch about how he worked on some well-known rock records, whether it be Nirvana's In Utero, or the Pixies' Surfer Rosa, or because of some random mongoloids talking about him on the internet. We're not talking about the records he produced in this video, although I would absolutely love to, but that's a story for another person on another day. When Steve Albini was 14 or something, he started playing the bass while trying to recover from a broken leg, and while taking lessons he'd gotten into bands like the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, Devo, and then he started playing in some band called Just Ducky, and a band in Chicago called Small Irregular Pieces of Aluminum, and a band that remains undisclosed on every website I could find. We all can take our guesses, probably Stations. Fuck all that shit, let's talk about lungs. While Albini was putting TR-606 drum machines on his belt on his campus, making up patterns and trading beer for tape machines, he was working on his very first EP for his new quote-unquote band called Big Black. Released in 1982, Lungs is a very unique and odd record in the Big Black discography, with everything being done by Albini, aside from a couple saxophones and screams, and having a drastically different sound than what Big Black would later become. Lungs contains a more industrial post-punk sound instead of the very abrasive, upbeat noise rock you would later find, and songs are often fairly minimalistic and somewhat repetitive, similar to what you would hear with early Sonic Youth, but maybe slightly less terrifying and not as well executed. They would also package things like razor blades, bloody tissues, and hair with the album. I'm not sure why, probably to creep people the fuck out. Lyrics typically would represent the worst extremes of the world, but that doesn't really happen yet. Sure, songs like Crack are about like addiction, or I Can Be Killed being about abuse, or something. I'm not really intelligent enough to understand what the hell Albini is talking about here, but the point is, this EP set the record for what Big Black would become, but also did something Big Black would never do again, and I say that because their next EP in 1983, Bulldozer, is drastically fucking different. Now, when Albini was jamming with Jeff Pezzati of Naked Ray Gun, which in turn made him join the band, and interrupting the TV as Santiago Durango, also Naked Ray Gun, which in turn made him join the band as well. And some other things led to another BAM! Bulldozer EP. Now, with there being like, other members being able to throw ideas around, like ideas for songs and the sound of the band, and not naming the album, they were able to achieve a tighter and slightly less primitive sound. They also went away from that post-punk industrial rock sound for a more post-hardcore noise rock sound. They also had a real drummer on this album, Pat Byrne, alongside the TR-606, giving it a very unique sound. Instead of the very low to mid-tempo, sort of nihilistic, bleak, and almost depressing tone of the Lungs EP, we had a more noisy, energetic, and some might even say a fun sound. There is still a little bit of Lungs in this EP, where Jump the Climb is an outtake from Lungs. I also would like to mention how the first couple hundred pressings of this album were released in full metal fucking jackets. I'm not even kidding, look it up. But all in all, the EP would be fundamental to the sound of what Big Black would later become. And like 2 years later, they released the Racer X EP, without the drummer, going all in for the drum machine using what I can assume is a mix of the TR-606 and Mimi Drumulator. I think. I'm not a drum machine expert, I'm just some random white guy on the internet. Racer X just sort of, to me, feels like a part 2 of what Bulldozer was, being more polished and being somewhat more spaced out in terms of composition compared to Bulldozer. Now that I think about it, it sort of feels nothing like Bulldozer, but I don't feel like making another comparison to Lungs because this album feels a lot more like Lungs again if it wasn't done by a single university graduate, but instead like 3 of them or something, I don't fucking know. Racer X was never my personal favorite Big Black record. Don't ask why, it's like asking why I like my women like my coffee, which fun fact, I don't like coffee. But I do love all of this EP. I love the use of the drum machine, I love all of the tracks. Ugly American is one of the best Big Black songs ever written, and I even like The Big Payback, being one of the funkiest songs Big Black would ever write. This also would be the last record to feature Jeff Pezzati. Either he got kicked out or he left to continue work on Naked Ray Gun. I honestly forgot, I don't feel like looking it up. But fuck Humorous and Humorless Spiller. Let's talk about Atomizer. Being the first record to feature Dave Riley on bass and being released in 1985, it's just one of my favorite albums of all time. It's certainly no double nickels, but holy fucking shit, this is just purely phenomenal. There are very few albums that give me goosebumps like this album does. It's nothing but non-stop creativity. Sure, it opens up with a track about a fucking child sex ring, but holy fucking shit, I can't really put into words how influential this album is on the music industry and even me as a person. It sounded really fucking terrifying. You know exactly what I meant. The album took everything that worked so well in Bulldozer and Racer X and just added upon it. There's songs like Passing Complexion and Big Money that retain the upbeatness of the earlier EPs, but then there's songs like Bad Houses and Fists of Love, also retaining some of that spaced out composition from Racer X. I also want to mention Kerosene being just a fucking masterclass in writing. For a song with a fuck-ass guitar riff, repetitive structure, weird-ass drum beat, and lyrics about setting yourself on fucking fire, it's just so well done. It's just an absolutely perfect track. And that's not to discredit any of the other tracks. Every track is phenomenally well written, composed, and just memorable. With only 10 tracks spanning 30 minutes, it's certainly a quality over quantity thing. The thing I love the most about this album is its use of harmonics. Tracks like Kerosene and Passing Complexion almost exclusively use harmonics for their main riffs. The sound of the album is also just unearthly, so alien, but it's so appealing and I keep gravitating back to it. This, alongside those albums everyone knows I love, is what I believe to be like a 11 out of 10 album. It's absolutely amazing. I can't recommend you listen to it enough. Fuck Atomizer, let's talk about Headache, in which I don't remember anything other than it just being like kind of okay. It's really short and like, having some guys blow out the brains as inserts too, that was a thing. It's not a bad EP, it's just kind of there, you can live without it. But fuck Headache, let's talk about songs about fucking. Released in 1987 and being the final album released by Big Black, they went away from the sound of Atomizer for a more quantity over quality adjacent sound. Having more, shorter, higher tempo songs, they aren't bad songs. In fact, I think all of these are great songs. But it doesn't have the same level of care and quality that Atomizer had. It's certainly got memorable tracks like Bad Penny, El Dopa, Colombian Necktie. There's just a lot more tracks that feel like filler here. While I like tracks like Kitty Empire and Casimir Espolsaki Day, they don't feel as unique as the tracks I mentioned previously like Bad Penny, El Dopa. You get the fucking point. Sort of out of ideas on what to say about this album other than everything I've already said, other than the fact that this would be the final album released by Big Black, as Santiago Durango wanted to go to law school or whatever. I don't fucking know. Durango would later go on to form Arsenal, which is sort of just Big Black, but nowhere near as good. It's still a great project, but nothing compared to Big Black. But now it's time to talk about those other bands Albini was in. We need to start strong with Run Ninja Run. That's not the actual name of the band, but with me being on a platform like this, there's no fucking way in hell that I'm saying shit like that. The band had Albini alongside Nash Cato of Urge Overkill, and they released a single song called Pray Don't Kill You Friend. And it's like a weirdly funky song. I'm not sure what I would call it. It sounds like something you would hear on Racer X, but twice as edgy. A good song with an unfortunate title. There's also The Army, which had Albini on bass and Jay Tiller on drums, from bands like Couch Flambeau and The Frogs. The Army only had one EP, called What Happened to Your Hand, which was recorded in 1986 but released in 2012. It's a really good listen, with it being a sort of funk rock, post-hardcore, maybe even being experimental rock. He also did some stuff with Pigface, but don't ask where because I haven't a clue, and he also would work with Whitehouse a lot. And, certain individual of whom I'm not mentioning. Other than all that shit, he partook in a little band called Rape Man. Great name, I know. Which effectively was just a mix of Scratch Ass and Big Black, featuring David Sims on bass, Ray Washam on drums, both of which from Scratch Acid, and Albini on guitar. And they would go on to release only a single EP, album, and a couple singles here and there. Now I won't be talking about the singles as I don't think they really matter all that much, but I will be talking about the EP and the album. Let's start with the EP, which came out first. And holy fucking shit, this EP is really good. The EP starts out with a very slow bud, which is very spaced out and has restrained drums before blowing up into a noisy mess, just like Bud himself. And holy fucking shit, this song is super good. It goes on for like 7.5 minutes, sure, but it's a fucking great song. And then there's also Super Pussy and Log Bass, which are just unfucking godly with how fucking badass they are. Super Pussy, by the way, is one of my favorite songs Albini would ever do. Just a super funky but also incredibly noisy fiasco. It's a shame that he can barely sing into a microphone. The album ends with Dutch Courage, the only track to have a studio recording on the EP. And like, it's cool, but I don't really remember liking it as much as the previous tracks. It's good, but it ain't no Super Pussy. They would also put out one of the best noise rock albums in my opinion, with Two Nuns and a Panky Mule in 1988. First of all, one of the best openers in history. Steak and Black Onions, a song that's just Albini shitting on vegans, is just an absolutely phenomenal track. And the entire album is just memorable too. Sure, the pacing is sort of all over the place and not entirely well thought out, but I think the album would have never worked as well if it weren't for the current order of all the tracks. I want to give a special shout out to Hate Chinese and Radar Love Lizard being some of my favorite tracks on the album. Don't ask why, I just really like them. The sound of Albini's guitar on this album is just fucking abrasive. I didn't even know it was possible for a guitar to make these sounds, but alas, Albini pulled it off. But like, that's right man, just big black X scratch acid. But anyways, let's talk about shellac. I'd like to spend a little less time on shellac because all of their albums are essentially the fucking same. Okay, that's a lie, but they were certainly more consistent in their sound. Right, okay, so shellac were Steve Albini on guitar. Who'd have fucking guessed? This time he had Bob Weston on bass and Todd Traynor on drums. Now, Shellac's first album, At Action Park, has a very different sound compared to Big Black or Rape Man. Moving away from the abrasive and loud noise rock of those bands, instead they went to a more mid-tempo post-hardcore sound, similar to something like Fugazi or Slimp, but nothing like either of them. They also would dabble in math rock, but I wouldn't say they did that much in this point of their life. They certainly would later on, but right now, not really. At Action Park had some phenomenal tracks like My Black Ass, Crow, Song of Minerals, and A Minute, but a lot of this album just felt forgettable to me. Not that I thought it was bad. In fact, every listen of this album I've ever had, I enjoyed it to a huge degree. I just think the album isn't as memorable as something like Atomizer or Two Nuns. Their next album, The Futurist, barely came out in 1997, and would remain mostly unreleased until whenever it got ripped onto digital audio formats. The album was more like a demo tape, but being pressed on a vinyl, and it's sort of an experimental, sort of post-rockish album that would have really been cool to see actually released, but alas, it never happened. It's believed the record was an unfinished album that Shellac weren't very happy with, so they just effectively redid everything for the next album, Terraform, which came out a year later. Terraform is a sort of you love it or you hate it album. Some people think it's the worst of the Shellac discography, and some people see it as one of the best. I'm with the crowd that believes it's one of the best, and that's purely because I think all the tracks here are just incredible. Honestly, I think it's more memorable than At Action Park. For one thing, the album starts off with a 12-minute track consisting of the same bassline and drum pattern, with the guitar kicking in periodically, and there's like some slight variance in the track to keep the listeners engaged. Needless to say, it didn't really engage many listeners. I think it's a really cool track, but even for a band that labels themselves as minimalistic rock, I think 12 minutes is a little much for a track like this. 6 to 8 minutes may have been better, but regardless, it works fine enough, and the rest of the album is where everything shines. Where the next track with This Is a Picture going in a complete 180, with it being much faster and energetic. This is also where you're gonna notice the band leaning towards a more of a math rock sound, with the band using a ton of fuck-ass time signatures like 3/4, 7/8, 9/8, 6/8, alongside being the usual post-hardcore noise rock we've all been accustomed to for the past however long this video's been. Songs like Copper in Canada would also finally make appearances on this album, with Copper being locked away in some random compilation, and Canada being locked away as a song from the Peel sessions. All in all, I think the album is just absolutely incredible. I love the sound they went towards. I love all the tracks. I just kind of wish people had the patience for the 12-minute track, as it may have turned a lot of people off from this album, which gave the reputation it has now. But let's forget about Terraform, and let's talk about 1000 Hertz and the rest of their discography, because I genuinely think they all sound the same. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but you get what I mean. 1000 Hertz is the point in Shellac's life where they found their sound, a sound that goes more to the math rock and post-hardcore sound, more so than the previous records, and it also retains the lower tempo that we were just starting to see on their previous albums. This album is a lot more laid back when compared to the previous works. It's a lot less in your face. It's still got some of those moments like Squirrel Song and Canaveral, but in totality, I don't even know if that's a word by the way, it's still a lot more laid back. That's to say At Action Park or Terraform were as in your face as something like Big Black or Rape Man, but in this context, it's like comparing Radiohead to Anal Cunt. And that's not me saying it's a bad thing, and I in fact love it. Sure, I may prefer At Action Park or Terraform over everything else, but I still love this direction they went in. When most people hear shellac, they think of 1000 Hertz, or the material itself, and with their next album, Excellent, Itallian, Greyhound, they didn't try any weird shit here. They just did what worked. and even started incorporating some post-rock because some of these assholes were into Slint. I don't like them. They brought back the idea of making laughably long songs for this album, and it's by far their longest album at 42 minutes, but it still works here. It still works very well. It's also a little less laid back when compared to 1000 Hertz, as it's got some pretty aggressive moments, but it's still more in the same vein as 1000 Hertz. Also, Strong Bad just appears on the album. During the spoken word section in Genuine Lullaby, he just appears, and it's just so fucking hilarious. It's so unexpected.
What one wants is the real thing.
And then their next album from 2014, Dude Incredible, they just did the same shit again, but it's still really good. Dude Incredible is probably my favorite record of this little portion of Shellac's discography. As, for one, I just think it's the most interesting, but also it's just the most unique in my eyes. And it's like At Action Park more than the others, which just made me realize that my previous statements are fucking lies. All in all, however, the entire Shellac discography is amazing, and I believe it's worth looking into for anyone into post-hardcore, or noise rock, or math rock, or even post-rock. Shellac is fucking awesome, and I think they're a little underrated when compared to other bands, even if they're still, like, relatively popular and not underrated, like, at all. In conclusion, there's nothing to conclude. I just wanted to yap about some random Italian-American guy. Just one last thing to mention, it's just that I kinda like Steve Albini. There's no goal for this video at all.